Drafted in the third round of the 2012 draft, he wasn't the favorite, nor the media's pick. While names like Andrew Luck and Robert Griffin III dominated the headlines, Wilson was seen as too small, too conservative, maybe even too good to be true. But what no one expected was that the 5'11" kid from the University of Wisconsin would become the face of a franchise in just a few months. Pete Carroll saw something others didn't. And Seattle, at that moment, needed exactly that. The team already had promising pieces: an emerging defense, a dominant running game with Marshawn Lynch, and a hungry locker room. But it lacked a central piece, and Wilson fit in as if he had been custom-made for it. Even in his rookie year, he unseated Matt Flynn, the veteran QB signed for a hefty price, and claimed the starting role as if it had always been his. Russell Wilson quickly became the silent engine of a relentless machine. He wasn't the most vocal, but his calm demeanor in clutch moments soon earned the respect of the roster. He was the type of quarterback who didn't flinch, who converted third downs with ease, who improvised, who prayed with his teammates, and kept the team grounded even in the most chaotic moments. In just his second year, Wilson led the Seahawks to Super Bowl XOF, and he didn't just win, he dominated. Against Peyton Manning's Denver Broncos, in one of the most lopsided performances in Super Bowl history, Seattle delivered a 43-8 thrashing. The defense, yes, was historic, but Wilson was precise, efficient, and lethal. A young quarterback, beating one of the all-time greats with poise and control. The world was starting to see he wasn't just a good game manager, he was special. The following year only solidified that status, with the Legion of Boom at its peak and Wilson growing. More confident, the Seahawks returned to the Super Bowl, this time against Tom Brady and the Patriots. And that's when the narrative began to shift. With the game virtually in hand, the interception at the 1-yard line changed everything. A single play, the play, turned Russell from hero to questioned. The blame was never entirely his, but he became the face of the most controversial decision in Super Bowl history. Even so, Wilson continued to shine in the years that followed. Elite stats, magical plays, unbelievable comebacks. For nearly a decade, he was Seattle's only offensive constant. The defense aged. Marshawn Lynch left. Coordinators came and went. But Russell stayed, carrying the team, solving problems with his legs, his arm, his mind. Never complaining, always smiling, always saying the right things. He was the leader every franchise dreams of, but something started to change, not overnight, but gradually. The smiles began to seem more forced. The connection with the locker room less natural. The relationship with Pete Carroll, once brotherly, began to crack. While Wilson asked for more offensive control and better protection, the team seemed more inclined to stick with its conservative system. Frustration began to surface between the lines of interviews. Wilson was always seen as unshakable. Even behind an often below-average offensive line, he would escape. Even when the game seemed lost, he would fight back. But the human body has its limits, and so does the patience of a franchise quarterback. What began as one of the most fruitful partnerships in the NFL, Wilson and Pete Carroll, was slowly turning into a worn-out relationship. A silent rift fed year after year, loss after loss. In 2020, after yet another early playoff exit, Wilson finally showed public signs of the frustration he had been bottling up. In an interview with Dan Patrick, he dropped a bomb. "I'm tired of getting hit so much." The statement landed like an explosion. For the first time, Wilson voiced his frustration with the lack of protection, and indirectly, with the front office. The message was clear. He wanted change, and if it didn't come, he might seek a new path. At the same time, the injuries started to come. In 2021, Wilson suffered an injury to the middle finger on his throwing hand and missed games for the first time in his career. When he returned, he wasn't the same. His passes lacked precision. His reads were slower. Time had finally caught up with the quarterback who for years had seemed immune to everything. Seattle, for its part, also seemed different. The defense was no longer dominant. The running game was inconsistent. And the team that once fought for Super Bowls was now struggling just to finish with a winning record. The magic had faded. and deep down, everyone knew it. Behind the scenes, trade rumors began to circulate. The relationship between Wilson and the coaching staff had cooled. The offensive system no longer seemed built for him, and maybe it never was. He wanted freedom. He wanted to be heard. He wanted to be the centerpiece of the project, like Mahomes in Kansas City, like Rodgers in Green Bay. In Seattle, he didn't feel like he was treated that way. In March 2022, the unthinkable happened. Russell Wilson was traded to the Denver Broncos. The franchise that drafted him, that he led to the top of the world, that he helped rebuild, decided it was time to move on, and so did Wilson. The trade became one of the biggest headlines of the past decade. Players, first-round picks, a fresh start. For Denver, it was a rebirth. For Seattle, a bittersweet farewell, but for Russell Wilson, it was a chance to prove he was still elite, that he was still one of the greats, that with a new roster, new coaches, and new systems, he could be reborn. And the Broncos believed in that, so much so that they rewarded him with a massive $245 million contract with $165 million guaranteed. It was the start of a new era, and the expectation was clear. Super Bowl, nothing less. When Russell Wilson arrived in Denver, it wasn't just a team change, it was an event, a media-fueled reboot. The Super Bowl winning quarterback, with nearly a decade of elite play, was now wearing orange. The team that had spent years searching for its final piece of the puzzle finally believed it had found it, and it spared no effort to show the world. Before even playing a single down for the Broncos, Wilson signed one of the most lucrative contracts in NFL history. 5 years, $245 million, with $165 million guaranteed. It was an unprecedented vote of confidence. It was also a statement: he is our future. But contracts like that don't just buy players, they buy expectations. And in Denver, expectations had now reached the stratosphere. The city was fired up. The defense was already elite. The arrival of new offensive head coach Nathaniel Hackett promised dynamism and modernity. The offense featured promising young receivers like Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton, along with a rejuvenated offensive line. The narrative was clear. Denver was one quarterback away from being a contender. And Wilson? He looked ready. Charismatic in interviews, he repeatedly dropped his new catchphrase: "Let's ride." But behind the smile and the over-the-top optimism, something didn't fit. The chemistry with the roster felt forced. Practices showed signs of disconnect. And in Week 1, ironically in his return to Seattle, facing his former franchise, doubts began to surface. The loss was tough, but what stood out was Russ's apathetic performance. Errant throws, hesitation, a lack of rhythm. In the following weeks, everything unraveled. Denver's offense became one of the worst in the league in points per game, even with Wilson under center. In several games, the team didn't even surpass 16 yards of offense in the first quarter. The play calling seemed misguided, the tempo was sluggish, and Wilson's leadership absent. The locker room began to crack. Members of the defense, elite that season, made it clear, albeit indirectly, that they were frustrated with having to carry the team while the offense failed. On top of that, Wilson's public demeanor began to rub people the wrong way. He kept up his motivational robotic speech even amid chaos. It began to come off as disconnected from reality. The final straw came when it was revealed that Russ had a private office inside the Broncos facility, separate from the other players, and even his own personal team, coaches, nutritionists, physical therapists, operating within the organization's structure. To many on the roster, it was an insult to the team culture. And Nathaniel Hackett, the rookie head coach, clearly didn't have the authority or control to handle the situation. The perception was that Russell Wilson was above the team, above the coach, above the system. But on the field, he was far below expectations. Way below. The lowest point of the season came in prime time, during a game in which the crowd at the stadium began counting the play clock out loud, mocking Wilson and the offense's inability to avoid delay of game penalties. It was a humiliating spectacle. By the end of the season, the Broncos finished 5-12. Hackett was fired before the final week. And Russell Wilson, once considered one of the greats of his generation, ended the year as the butt of jokes, memes, and scathing analyses. He went from legend to million-dollar dead weight in a matter of months. The billion-dollar contract? Still weighing on the salary cap. The promise of a new era? Shattered. Russ's reputation? More tarnished than ever before. But one question still remained. Was the problem only on the field? If his on-field performance was already surprising, what truly shocked people about Russell Wilson in Denver was what started to emerge from behind the scenes. For many, the decline of an elite quarterback would typically be seen as a technical stumble, a natural downturn in a career arc. But Wilson's case took a different turn, a collapse of image, leadership, and credibility. And it came from the inside out. The once silent locker room began to emit clear signs of discomfort. Veteran defensive players, who had kept the team, competitive in almost every game, started dropping indirect messages in the media. One linebacker even said, "We're doing our job, but it feels like only one side of the team is really committed." In another moment, after yet another prime time, loss. A reporter asked a defensive player what needed to change on the team. He answered with a single word: everything. The media quickly picked up on the growing divide between Wilson and his teammates. He seemed out of place in the locker room, and the facts backed that up. Wilson had his own private office at the Broncos facility, something extremely rare. For any player, he maintained a personal performance team, including physical therapists, consultants, and coaches operating inside team headquarters, but not reporting to the coaching staff. There were even reports that some players had to go through intermediaries just to speak with him directly, as if dealing with a celebrity, rather than a teammate. These details slowly destroyed the leadership capital Wilson had built since his Seattle days. He, who had always been praised for his spirituality, positivity, and calm presence, was now seen as distant, artificial, and overly rehearsed. Catchphrases like "let's ride" began to sound like out-of-touch memes, not words of command. And then came the public humiliation. During one of the most painful losses of the season, defensive tackle Mike Purcell was caught on camera yelling at Wilson on the sidelines. It was a symbolic moment, the side of the team making all the sacrifices erupting in frustration at the passivity of the multi-million-dollar quarterback. The image went viral. The post-game interview was uncomfortable. Wilson, as always, responded calmly with neutral phrases. But by that point, no one seemed to be listening anymore. The media, which had always treated Russell with respect, began to turn against him. Former players, analysts, and journalists started questioning everything. Has he always been like this and we just didn't see it? Did Seattle protect him more than we thought? Is this a leadership failure or just unchecked ego? Russell. Wilson's image shifted from reliable star to strange figure within the NFL. His polished, robotic communication, once interpreted as professionalism, now sounded like a lack of authenticity. Even other elite players, like Richard Sherman and Marshawn Lynch, former Seahawks teammates, made indirect comments reinforcing the idea that Russ was never really that close to the locker room. What remained was the image of a wealthy, isolated quarterback trying to stay positive as the team crumbled around him. And when you lose the locker room's respect, something invisible but essential, it's almost impossible to get it back. But the NFL is a league of turnarounds, and not every ending is final. At the beginning of 2023, the Broncos made a bold move. They hired Sean Payton as their new head coach. The same Sean Payton who, for nearly 2 decades, led Drew Brees in Chaiti Aoi, one of the most productive partnerships in history. His mission was clear: rebuild Russell Wilson or replace him. Payton arrived with a firm stance. He made it clear that there would be no untouchable stars. He ended internal privileges. He reduced the access Wilson's personal team had to the facilities, and he demanded that the quarterback return to basics: training, mechanical adjustments, decision-making. What was once improvisation would now have to be structure. What was once ego would now need to be humility. Wilson, in turn, seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. During the off-season, he lost weight, adjusted his training routine, and spoke openly about self-criticism. In interviews, he abandoned his catchphrases. He sounded less rehearsed, more human. Was it too late? Maybe. But there was something new. There, a sincere attempt at rebuilding. And indeed, in the first weeks of the next season, the signs were more promising. Russell showed flashes of the player he was in Seattle: movement in the pocket, precision on deep throws, composure in pressure moments. But even with his individual improvement, the team's results remained inconsistent. The defense struggled. The offense still seemed stuck in certain games, and the weight of his contract still loomed over everything. The truth is that, even playing better, Russ still needed to prove he could win big games. That he was still that guy. That he was worth every penny invested, and that's not built in 1 or 2 games. It's a slow process. And in Denver, time is a luxury few have. Today, Russell Wilson finds himself at a rare crossroads in the NFL. He is not a rookie trying to prove himself. He is not a veteran retiring in glory. He's in the middle, with everything to lose, and maybe something still to gain. But there is one thing no one can deny. Russell Wilson is resilient. He always has been. He was doubted in college because of his height, ignored in the draft, underestimated even after winning a Super Bowl, and now, once again, he's trying to prove he can still be elite, that he can still lead, that he can still, against all odds, be reborn. Will he succeed? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain. The scary truth about Russell Wilson isn't just the fall he's endured, it's how much he still believes he can rise again.